I sold your car. Derek didn't even look up from his phone as he threw a crumpled ticket against my chest. My card was declined at the caterers an hour ago. The investors were there, watching. I needed money immediately to pay the deposit. I froze. You sold my Honda? Derek, I pay for that car every month. It's how I get to work. He finally raised his head, his gaze icy. It's in my name, remember? Your credit was disastrous, so I did you a favor. Legally, it belongs to me. My cards were refused at the caterer an hour ago. Investors were watching. I needed cash. Now. I froze. Completely. As if the ground had just slipped away from under my feet. Did you sell my Honda? I said that in a low voice, almost in a whisper. Marcus. I pay for this car every month. That's what I'm going to work with. He finally looked up at me. His eyes were cold. Calculators. The eyes of an accountant who looks at a column of numbers, not his sister. It's registered in my name, remember? Your credit was 0, so I did you a favor. Legally, it's my property. He has allowed a silence to settle. Then, with a smile that contained no warmth, I liquidated it. I barely had enough to cover the champagne. Next time, buy a better car if you want it to count. That's it. 10 years of blind trust. 10 years of getting up early, filling in the gaps, paying the bills that no one else saw. And he had just sold the only means of transport I had, to pay bubbles to people who didn't care about the two of us. I turned around slowly. Sophia, his wife, was slumped on the sofa, phone in hand, giggling at a video. She didn't even look up. It was not a family. It was a dictatorship. And that night, without knowing it, Marcus had just signed his own death warrant. Let me tell you what it's like to grow up in the shadows. My name is Elise. I am 29 years old. And since the age of 19, my entire existence has revolved around a single axis. The needs of my brother Marcus. When our parents died, first our father, who died of a heart attack on an ordinary Tuesday night, then our mother 2 years later, as if she had no longer seen the point of staying. We were 27 and 19 years old, respectively. Marcus was the eldest. Marcus was the man. Marcus was, in his own head, the visionary, the leader, the guardian of the family legacy. You're too young, Elise, he told me, in that deceptively protective tone he'd perfected over the years. You're too emotional to handle all this. Let me take the burden. You, concentrate on your studies. And I, devastated by grief, exhausted, lost, I said yes. The deeds of ownership had been put in his name. The bank accounts of the estate, in his name. Legal decisions, in his name. But the bills. The invoices came in my name. There had been the winter when the penthouse heating had failed. Marcus was in Aspen, networking at parties I couldn't afford to attend. He had called me in a panic at 12 p.m. on a Sunday evening. Elise, we have to fix this. This is our home. Our heritage. $3,000. I was the one who paid for them. There had been the year when the property taxes for the warehouse, an old industrial building that our parents had left behind in South Los Angeles, had been overdue for 18 months. Marcus had called me from a Michelin-starred restaurant, his voice dramatic, theatrical. We are going to lose the family heritage, Elise. If you don't act now, we lose everything Dad has built. I had emptied my savings account. $4,200. To the last cent. Marcus loved the word, we. It was his tool of choice. When there was a debt, it was our problem. When there was a win, it was his success. When there was thankless work, it was our family obligation. But when there was ownership, prestige, recognition, the weed disappeared like smoke under a fan. Sitting in that cold penthouse, staring at the crumpled receipt at my feet, I finally understood the exact translation of Marcus' language. In a toxic family, the word we is the most dangerous trap in the dictionary. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. Los Angeles was baking in a historic heat wave, the kind of heat that makes even the sidewalks glow well past midnight. The air shakes on the asphalt, and the entire city smells of hot plastic and distant brush fires. Inside the penthouse, the air conditioning was running at full blast. The air was almost freezing. The contrast was stark, like living in an artificial bubble while the rest of the world burned. I was sleeping, or rather trying to sleep, when the door to my room slammed open violently, slamming against the wall with a noise that roused me from a restless half-sleep. Marcus was in the doorway. He was holding a large black garbage bag in one hand, those thick industrial bags used for rubble. He threw it on the floor, at the foot of my bed. The bag landed with a thud, plastic against tiles. "Get up," he said. His voice was not loud. She was worse than that. She was sharp, impatient, with that maniacal irritation which I had recognized since childhood, that which preceded the worst scenes. "Sophia needs this room. She makes a wardrobe reveal for her live tomorrow. And your stuff ruins the aesthetics." I sat up in bed, blinking into the harsh light of the hallway. "Marcus. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't care how much time it is," he replied, in a perfectly flat voice. "I packed your suitcase. Consider it a courtesy." He shot the bag in the direction of my feet. "Now get out." I looked at the bag. He hadn't packed my suitcase. He had scraped the top of my life like one picks up garbage in a yard. Everything that was lying around at hand, a few clothes, chargers, a book, thrown loose into a garbage bag. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, in a surprisingly calm voice. "You sold my car." He laughed. A short, dry, joyless laugh. "Go live in the warehouse. It's empty. At least there, you'll be with yours." A pause. "Garbage." He turned on his heels and went down the hallway without looking back. The door to my room was left wide open. I could hear Sophia in the master bedroom, her high-pitched voice complaining about the lighting for her video. I sat there for exactly 10 seconds. I counted them. A younger version of me would have cried. She would have run after him in the corridor. She would have begged. She would have promised to put her things away, to take up less space, to exist less strongly. She would have done anything to avoid conflict, to maintain a peace that had never really existed. But that version of me had evaporated in the air conditioning the second Marcus threw that car sales receipt at my chest. I stood up. I put on my jeans. My boots. I put on my coat. I took the garbage bag. He weighed less than 10 kilos. Apparently, my value in this house was less than 10 kilos. I walked through the corridor without running. I walked slowly, deliberately, past the master bedroom where Sophia's voice came from. The ring light is too far to the right, it hollows out my cheeks. Past the kitchen where the empty bottles of champagne lined up like witnesses to a party I hadn't been invited to. I opened the front door. I let it close gently behind me. No snapping. No drama. Just the discreet click of a lock that closes on 10 years of my life. The elevator took forever to come down. When the doors opened to the street, the warm air hit me like a wave. After the artificial cold of the penthouse, it was almost a slap in the face. The air smelled of exhaust, dust, and something farther away. Burnt wood, perhaps fires in the hills. I hoisted the bag over my shoulder and started walking towards the night bus terminal. 5 miles through sleepy Santa Monica. In front of the closed shops with their gates down. In front of the people who slept under boxes in the corners of the doors. Under the palm trees motionless in the heavy air. And with each step, the rhythm of my boots on the asphalt hit something in me. A cadence. A signal. I stopped thinking like a sister. I stopped thinking like a victim. I went into logistics mode. I work in flow management. Logistics. My job is not just to move crates from point A to point B. It is to analyze systems. Identify inefficiencies. Find leaks. Understand why something that should work doesn't work. That evening, walking under the pale stars of an overheated Los Angeles, I began to apply this logic to my own situation. Current status. Homeless. Transport available. Night bus. Financial reserves. An account with $847. 2 credit cards and a prepaid card. Active, a background in logistics. 5 years of field experience. And a brain that never really sleeps. Passive. A brother who had spent 10 years engineering my addiction. Because that's the truth I had refused to see. Marcus had not only exploited me out of selfishness. He had done it systematically. He had kept my credit report in poor health so I couldn't rent my own apartment. He had managed the family assets in such a way that I would never have any financial leverage of my own. He had structured each favor to create a new dependency. He hadn't thrown me out in anger. He had thrown me out because he thought I had nowhere else to go. He thought that living in an empty warehouse would break me. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know because he'd never been to that warehouse for years, because he was loath by the dirt and the physical exertion, was that he'd just given me something. He had just given me a territory that he had never bothered to explore. The bus dropped me off 3 blocks from the industrial district at 4 in the morning. The asphalt here was different. Cracked, uneven, streaked with old forklift brands. Even at this hour, the heat was rising from the foundations, penetrating the soles of my boots. The air smelled of diesel, cement dust, and something even older. Rust. Time. I stopped in front of the building. He was not handsome. He had never been handsome. It was an old industrial brick from the 70s, massive and ugly, with barred windows and a facade covered in faded graffiti. The for sale sign that Marcus had put up months earlier hung askew on the gate, half peeled off by the sun. I had the only duplicate key that I kept on my keyring. The last key he hadn't taken from me. The lock gave way after a few seconds. The large rolling door groaned as it moved up, a creak that echoed like a scream across the silent street. Inside, it was worse than outside. The heat was suffocating, static, as if the air hadn't moved in years. The darkness was total. I couldn't hear anything, just the distant hum of the city outside. I turned on my phone's light and scanned the room. Broken pallets. Collapsed boxes. Rusty paint cans. Industrial cables wound into coils. The abandoned remains of an activity that I no longer knew exactly what it had been. Marcus called this place a ball. He said it was a wart on his portfolio. He had tried to sell it 6 times in 4 years, but the neighborhood was unfavorable, and no serious buyer had come forward. He had a developer who was offering $500,000 for the land. Just the land, after demolition, and Marcus was willing to sign because he needed to pay off a debt of $200,000. $500,000 to pay off $200,000 in debt. And he thought it was a good deal. I cleared a corner with my foot, pushing the rubble away, and I sat on my garbage bag. The ground was hard, cold despite the general heat of the air. For the first time in years I stopped. Really stopped. Without an agenda. No meeting to prepare. No bills to pay urgently. Speechless in my earpiece asking me to fix something. And in this silence, mathematics has made up for lost time. 10 years. 10 years to pay for the repairs that Marcus ordered. 10 years of covering taxes that he forgot. 10 years of being the invisible foundation of a castle whose architecture he claimed to himself. He sent me here because he thought it was the maximum punishment. The ultimate degradation. Living in the garbage. But Marcus had a fundamental flaw, one that I knew perfectly well from childhood. He had a visceral aversion to everything dirty, manual, physical. He had not been near this warehouse for at least 5 years. He couldn't stand the dust on his shoes. He didn't know what was here. He had never looked. And I had training for exactly that, to look where others don't look. 7 days later, the temperature had risen again. 104 degrees Fahrenheit. 40 degrees Celsius. The warehouse was an oven. I had set up a makeshift hammock between 2 beams, hung a tarp to create a shaded area, and was running on solar power, a small power bank that I had bought with what little cash I had. I had created a rhythm for myself. Methodical inspection of the building. Inventory of what was there. Audit of my options. It was that morning that Marcus returned. He pushed the side door with the frantic energy of someone who is not used to problems coming to him. His linen suit, probably $2,000 at the very least, was drenched in sweat before he even entered. He looked like a peacock in a garbage dump. Moved. Furious at being moved. He didn't say hello. He took a red envelope out of his inner jacket and threw it at me. She bounced against my chest, decidedly her favorite move, and slid across the concrete floor. "Fix that," he said, wiping his forehead with a silk handkerchief. I picked up the envelope. Notice of final cut. Los Angeles Department of Water and Electricity. Amount due, $4,180. I looked up at him. "I got a call from the collection agency this morning," he continued, not letting me speak. "You've been squatting here for a week and you haven't even transferred the meters to your name? You're irresponsible. Do it today. I'm not going to pay for electricity from a landfill." Marcus. I didn't use any electricity. I charge my phone with a solar battery. I didn't turn on a single light bulb. He looked at me like someone who makes up excuses. "I don't care what you do or don't do. The invoice is in the name of the estate. That means it's my problem. Transfer the meter today, or I'll have the power cut off and the meter ripped off." He left as quickly as he had come, in a hurry to find his air-conditioned car parked in double file outside. I stayed there, envelope in hand. And then something caught my eye. On the back of the notice, there was a graph. The building's electricity consumption curve over the last 30 days. A blue line on a white background. In my work, I read graphs all day long. Flow curves. Peaks in consumption. Data anomalies. When a warehouse is empty or not very active, the line is irregular. Peaks during the day, troughs at night, jumps when a machine starts. But this line was flat. Perfectly horizontal. High consumption. Constant. 24 hours a day. 7 days a week. No variation. This is not the profile of an empty building. This is not even the profile of a normal active building. This is the profile of equipment in continuous operation. Something that never goes out. Something that maintains a specific condition, regardless of the time of day. Something like a climate control system. I looked around. The silence was total. No audible humming. No signs of electrical operation. But the counters don't lie. I went to the electrical panel on the back wall. An old industrial panel, covered in decades of dust and grease. I opened the case. Half of the circuit breakers were taped and labeled out of service. But a circuit breaker, in the bottom right corner, was warm to the touch. The label read, Zone 4. I followed the electrical conduit by eye. It climbed up the wall, through the ceiling beams, and disappeared behind a pile of plywood sheets leaning against the back of the warehouse. I approached. I pulled the first plate. It fell in a cloud of dust. Behind it, it wasn't a brick wall. It was plasterboard. Recent. Clean. Someone had built a partition. A false wall to shorten the room, to hide what was behind it. I looked for my crowbar in the tool bag I had retrieved from the rubble in a corner. I pushed it into the joint between the plates. I fired. The plasterboard cracked, collapsed. And then, a thin trickle of cold air hit me in the face. Cold. Sterile. Conditioned. Like the air inside a museum or a vault. And with this tune, a sound. Deaf. Regular. A deep, deep hum that the insulation had until then completely absorbed. I widened the opening with a crowbar until I could get through. What I saw on the other side stopped my brain in its tracks. Not in the same way that a fear stops you. Rather in the same way that a perfect equation stops you. When the two sides match exactly and you realize that you've just solved something huge. The space was plunged into darkness, lit only by hundreds of small green LEDs. The operating lights of a row of industrial humidifiers, lined up against the walls like silent sentinels. These machines were the source of the hum. These machines maintained the atmosphere of the room, controlled temperature, constant humidity, filtered air. I raised my phone lamp. The beam went through the darkness and hit something that looked like a huge clear light bulb. Round. Inflated. Like a giant bubble placed on the concrete floor. An automotive storage capsule. These airtight inflatable envelopes are used to preserve classic vehicles in a controlled environment, protected from humidity, temperature variations, dust. There was not one. There were 12 of them. 12 bubbles. Lined up in military rank in this secret space, under the silent protection of the machines that had been buzzing for years, in a subspace that Marcus had never visited, in a building that he wanted to raise for $500,000. I walked to the first capsule. My lamp slipped on the curve of a fender. The painting was a deep green, almost black, Highland green. A fastback roofline, clean and taut like an arrow. An aggressive, square muzzle. My heart started beating hard. Very strong. I knew this car. Everyone knew this car. I went around the windshield to reach the back. And there, on the rear bumper, there was a dent. Not a parking accident. A specific, famous, unrepaired, documented deformation. I looked at the sides of the box. Traces of welding on the rocker panels. Attachment points for a camera cage. It was Bullitt's Mustang. The real one. The car from the 1968 film, the one that had been gone for decades, that collectors around the world were looking for as the Holy Grail. I took a step back. My hands trembled slightly. I pointed my lamp at the second capsule. Red. Red Ferrari. A bodyline that I would have recognized with my eyes closed. The curve of the hood, the almost painful elegance of the 60s. A license plate. The letters. NRVOUS. The 1961 Ferrari 250 GT California Spider. Ferris Bueller's rest day car. The one that all of Hollywood swore had been destroyed during the shooting. It had not been destroyed. It had been hidden here. I didn't scream. I didn't dance. I breathed once, slowly, and took out my phone. I didn't call Marcus. I called Gabriel. Gabriel was a cargo specialist with whom I had worked 2 years earlier on a nightmarish contract. A shipment of collector's watches that had to transit through Dubai, with customs complications at every step. He had handled it with surgical precision and absolute calm. He never asked unnecessary questions. And above all, he knew what things were worth. Gabriel. I need you. Tonight if possible. What's going on? A logistical problem. Special inventory. I'll give you the address. He arrived 40 minutes later, in a grey sedan with no distinctive signs. He looked at the facade of the building, the sales sign hanging askew, the rusty fences, with his eyebrow slightly raised. You told me about an inventory problem, Elise. It looks more like a demolition site. It's not the building that counts. That's what's inside. Follow me. I guided him through the warehouse and then through the hole in the partition. I handed him a flashlight. Zone 4, I said simply. Take the time you need. There was a silence. Long. Then I heard her breathing change. The bumper down, he whispered. Not for me. For himself. It's real. The camera mounting welds on the rocker panels are still there. It moved towards the second bubble. Prolonged silence. The California Spider. They said that the hero car had been destroyed. Crushed. He turned back to me. In the half-light, lit only by the green LEDs of the humidifiers, his eyes were wide. It was not crushed. It has been hidden here. He spent the next 20 minutes moving from capsule to capsule. He checked the VIN numbers through the plastic with a pocket magnifying glass that he always took out of his jacket. He inspected the underbody, the sides, the details that cannot be wrong. He was taking notes on his phone with hands that weren't quite shaking normally. When he came back to me, he took off his glasses and wiped them on his shirt, a gesture I had never seen him do, and which I understood as a sign of an emotion that he didn't know how else to handle. Elise, he said. His voice was measured, but something underneath vibrated like a string that was too tight. Do you have any idea what you're standing on? I have an estimate, I replied. But I need a number. Conservative estimate. Fast sale to a private buyer, without marketing. He looked at the ceiling for a second. 12 million. The ground beneath me seemed to move slightly. What if we go to auction? Sotheby's. Christie's. With the story of the lost fleet of cinema, with the documentation, with the whole mystery. He blew slowly. 15 million. Easily. Maybe 18, 20 if the story comes out well. $20 million. Marcus wanted to sell the land for $500,000. To repay $200,000 in debts. He was sitting on $20 million. And he threw me here because he thought I'd be too helpless, too broken, too grateful to have a roof over my head to think about looking behind the walls. I stayed up all night calculating. Not the numbers, I knew them. What I calculated was the strategy. Movements. The exact sequence that would turn this situation into something irreversible. The problem was legal. The cars were in a building owned by the family estate, managed by Marcus. Even though I had discovered the cars, even if I had been the one to identify their value, I technically didn't own anything in that warehouse. But Marcus didn't know what he had. And his own arrogance was going to betray him. I called Gabriel back the next morning. I explained my thinking to him. He listened without interrupting me. When I finished, he just said, "You need a contract lawyer. Tonight." I had a former colleague, Nadia, who had left logistics for commercial law 4 years ago. I called her at 7 in the morning. She picked up at the first ring. Here's what I had. Marcus wanted to sell the land. To finalize the sale, he had to empty the building. However, the building contained what his own lawyer had categorized, in the preliminary sales documents, as equipment and various contents, status to be determined. And there was a penalty clause in the preliminary sales contract. If the building was not emptied on time, Marcus faced a penalty of $50,000. Marcus was in a hurry. Marcus was anxious. Marcus didn't know what was in the capsules. What Gabriel had learned, as he dug quietly, was that Marcus had told his associates that the subspace was probably contaminated. Old cans of industrial chemicals, perhaps. He was afraid to open the capsules without prior inspection. He feared decontamination costs. I let this rumor grow. Then I came to Marcus with a proposal. I can take care of the emptying of the warehouse, I told him on the phone, in a voice as neutral as possible. The content in Zone 4 is probably old industrial equipment. I know some waste pickers. I can empty it for free if you sign me a transfer of content. Marcus silenced. Assignment. A standard document, I said. It protects you legally if there are ever dangerous materials. It transfers the responsibility to me. That way, you are not involved if something is problematic for the Environmental Inspectorate. I could hear Marcus thinking. I knew this silence. It was the silence of someone who calculates how much this conversation can bring him, or cost him. So you get the scrap metal, and I'm cleared if the inspectorate finds something. Exactly. And you empty for free? For free. And before the deadline. You avoid the penalty of $50,000. One last silence. Send the document. I'm signing it tonight. Nadia had prepared the contract with surgical precision. The central clause, written in perfectly banal legal language, transferred to my name the entire contents of Zone 4 of the warehouse located at address, including all vehicles, equipment, articles and materials stored therein. Marcus signed without reading. He had signed the cars. On the evening of the closing of the sale, Marcus had invited a small reception in a trendy bar in Silver Lake. He had ordered champagne, naturally, to celebrate the $500,000 that would allow him to pay off his debts and, in his own words, start over on a better footing. Sophia wore a new dress. Marcus' eyes were shining with the excitement of someone who thinks he's gotten out of a bad situation. I sat down across from him. Congratulations on the sale, I said. He had a smile that contained all the condescension of the last 10 years. Yes. You see, Elise, that's business. Know when to cut dead branches. The warehouse was a wart. Now it's money. 500,000 is good. It's enough to fix what needs to be fixed. I put my phone on the table, facing him. The screen showed an email. The header was that of the Sotheby's auction house, classic car department. Marcus looked down. He read. The first line of the email confirmed the catalog acceptance of 2 vehicles for the fall auction. The second line mentioned the low estimate for the 2 flagship pieces, $13 million. He slowly looked up at me. What's that? Zone 4 cars, I said calmly. You signed me a transfer of all the contents of the warehouse 10 days ago. My lawyer has a copy. Your lawyer has one too. I sent him this morning. Marcus' face has changed. The smugness disappeared at first. Then the color. In the space of a few seconds, he looked like someone who had just walked in the void on the edge of a cliff. You stole from me. No, I said softly. You signed me a document. You yourself defined the contents as waste. Your own lawyer validated the contract. These are your terms, not mine. I'm going to contest. You can try. I picked up my phone again. But the contract is concrete. And the story will be published in the specialized press in 2 weeks. The lost fleet of Hollywood cinema found in a Los Angeles warehouse. It's going to make a lot of noise. I stood up. I would have shared with you, Marcus. If you had treated me like a partner instead of a servant, I would have shared. But you sold my car for champagne. And you threw me in the street with a garbage bag. I watched it one last time. The garbage had value. You just never bothered to look.